It is said that in the Middle Ages, witches allegedly kept men's members as pets after severing them from their sorry owner. A true travesty, as it's almost certain that these specimens must have been smelly and poorly groomed to say the least. Although nowadays the odds of a witch taking your crown jewels are far lower, keeping them clean and well groomed should be a top priority. Enter Manscaped, the pinnacle of refinement for the gentleman. With their unique assortment of products, you'll be heading for optimal health, hygiene, and self-esteem very soon. Not to mention the cleanest and best trim of your life. And as they say, your balls will thank you. So get your grooming sorted out today to receive 20% off and free shipping with promo code Mortis20. And who knows? The witch may even let you keep yours. This happened a few years ago when I was still living with my mum, and I had borrowed her car to go see my then boyfriend for the evening. It was around midnight when I got back to my neighborhood, so the roads were empty. And that's when I noticed this dirty, run-down, rusted, white utility van that a maintenance guy would drive, following me. I never ever saw the driver's face, but I got this immediate sinking feeling in my stomach, because something felt wrong about this van. Now I was only 20 at the time, but I knew better than to just drive straight to my house and letting this person know exactly where I live, no matter how desperately I wanted to just go home and ignore it. But I also wasn't 100% sure they were actually following me yet. I didn't want to jump to conclusions because it was late and I was alone and being paranoid. So I drove to a shopping complex a few minutes out of the way that's well lit and has a public library to see if I were followed there. I thought I lost the van, but decided to wait in the parking lot for a few minutes because I had a bad feeling that I just couldn't shake. Sure enough, the van showed up and was driving in random circles around the parking lot looking for me. This scared me quite a bit, so I drove towards the big mall here that's always got security and police, because it was the midway point between where I was and where I lived. I parked in a pretty well-lit, although empty 24-hour McDonald's parking lot where I had a great view of the roads and the mall, but I wasn't super easy to spot and waited to see if the van showed up looking for me. It did. And of course, this would be the only time security and the cops are nowhere to be found, which was half the reason I decided to head there in the first place. Realizing whoever was driving this van was 100% actively following me in the middle of the night, I knew I couldn't just drive home. This wasn't an option. And that's a terrifying realization. Luckily, the police station is just a few minutes away from where I was, so I try to discreetly drive away, hoping the van hasn't noticed me yet. I wasn't that lucky, because it wasn't before long the van was back in my rearview mirror. At this point I'm panicking pretty hard, and my anxiety is high. I finally pulled into the police station parking lot, and seconds later the van came to a stop in the middle of the road for no more than a few seconds. I'm guessing just long enough for them to realize where I led them, and they took off immediately very fast. I did make it home safe and without seeing the van again not long after. But this whole ordeal took up at least an hour of my night. It was after 1 a.m. by the time I made it home, and I was terrified the entire time. I don't know what this guy's specific intentions were, but honestly, I didn't need to know. I knew it was nothing good, and I likely avoided a very bad situation. If you think someone is following you, it's not stupid or paranoid to make sure you aren't right. Who knows what might have happened if I'd have led them to my house or gotten out of the car. It was August of 1992, and I had just moved to Sydney, Australia from my home in New York. My grandfather had recently passed after a prolonged cancer battle. He was my favorite grandparent, and almost 30 years later, I still miss his warmth and stories. I still dream about him to this day, and in my dreams I tell him how much I miss him. During this period while he was dying, my parents had been making plans for our family to move from our home in New York to Sydney, Australia, as my dad is Australian and had been offered a job during a previous visit to his side of the family. The combined passing of my grandfather and the sudden uprooting of my comfortable and familiar life to live halfway across the world had left me feeling insecure and alone. Forced to adjust to a life in a different cultural environment, away from all my childhood friends, and old school was different for a 10-year-old. To help alleviate these feelings of homesickness, my parents got me a puppy, a chocolate Labrador called Milo. He was only 6 weeks old when we got him, and like all puppies, he was a handful. My mum would get angry at me, as he would constantly howl during the night, and would rip out the stuffing from our sofas. We would wake up to tufts of couch foam scattered all over the living room. My mother was a manic depressive, and losing her father, my grandfather, had only compounded her grief and rage at the world. She threatened to send the puppy to the pound, or give him away to one of her friends. When my mother would lose it, I would take Milo out for a walk near our home. We wouldn't venture too far, just a few blocks to this park I knew, where we could be alone, and I could think. The park is hard to describe. It was a public park with a swing set and some walking trails, but had the appearance of a semi-cleared forest with a lot of unkept shrubs, old trees with spindly branches that would reach out in all directions, as well as wild grass that you could get lost in. It was not huge, but not exactly small either, and for a kid it was an easy place to lose yourself in with all its dark corners of backwoods. The name is Harborview Park if you wish to Google it. The park had 2 entrances, a steep stone staircase that led to a sidewalk above, and another staircase that led to a sidewalk below. I was walking Milo on the sidewalk above the park, when suddenly a car pulled up in front of me. I think the car was white, and I don't remember the make now, but it was some kind of sedan. An overweight middle-aged man with a huge walrus moustache and sunglasses got out the driver door in front of me and looked straight at me. I froze, and I still remember him saying, "I'm not gonna hurt ya," and that triggered some primal panic in me. My parents had always told me to be very wary of strangers, and even at 10, I was fully aware that children were prone to being taken and have their lives ended. I grabbed Milo up in my arms and bolted down the stone stairs, descending into the deep bowels of the canopied park below. My heart was beating so loudly I could feel its reverberations in my throat. I darted behind some shrubbery near a broken tree trunk. I was holding Milo so tight against me that I was worried I might crush him. Through the branches I could make out the street above and see the white sedan was idling above, but the man did not follow me. I hid there in the shrubbery, almost completely still for what seemed like half an hour. The car above never moved, but no one came down into the park either. Eventually I ran through the long grasses and through detritus of this half-park, half-forest floor. Sunlight poured in from the other end of the park like a light at the end of a tunnel. There were stairs at the southern end, just like there were above. I walked down the street, nervously glancing around for a white sedan. It was twilight now, and the sun was setting beneath the red brick house that made up my neighborhood. I resolved to make it back to my home and ran the 5 minutes back, never telling my parents what I thought had nearly happened to me. About 2 days later, I heard on the local news about an abduction, A girl disappears while getting off her bus a few suburbs away from me. There are people being taken all the time, and of course there's no proof it was in any way related to my own experience. There's also no proof that the walrus-moustached man in the white sedan was even out to take me. It's possible he was going to ask a 10-year-old for directions, and I was nervous. However, I don't believe a normal grown man would stop and ask a 10-year-old for directions, or anything else of an innocent nature for that matter. Was he out to take me? I'll never know for sure, but I think I made the right choice in running. For a long time I was scared to walk my dog near my home, and I would get a lump in my throat whenever I saw a similar car slow down near my side. I eventually moved on, but I'll never forget that feeling of sheer panic I felt as I rushed down into the park that day. I'm a 26-year-old female from Michigan, but I was 20 at the time this took place. I live in a safe town and I was working at a Walmart in the next town over, which is an even safer town. I worked midnights because I am definitely not a people person. Every day I would go home on my lunch to see my new puppy, which to this day has kept me going through countless problems in my life. Working midnights, there were basically no cars on the road when I was going home on my lunches. It was when I was about 4 miles from work at a stoplight that I noticed a car had been behind me for a mile or two. I drove like a grandma and always go on the speed limit, so there wasn't a reason for someone to stay behind me with a clear open road overall. I keep on my way home. The car is still behind me for another mile. I thought, okay, that's weird, but maybe a coincidence. I then had to turn on a side street with only neighborhoods along either side for about a mile. You guessed it, the car turned too. I started to get worried, but still brushed it off. Perhaps they lived down that street. It was when I turned into my neighborhood I started to lose it, when the car was still following me. I turned down my street but didn't pull into my driveway because I didn't want to lead this creeper to my house, so I kept driving and took another way back out of my neighborhood. The car persisted. Just to be positive, before I called 911, I drove through my neighborhood the same way as before and he followed again. I got back on the main road from the side street and dialed 911, crying because I was terrified, and explained the situation to them. I headed back towards my work. She asked where I was and told her the crossroads, and lucky me, there was a patrol unit a mile up, and the car was still following me. She stayed on the phone with me and told me to pull up to the 7-Eleven at the crossroads and the police were close. The car pulls in after me. The dispatch lady told me to turn my hazards on so the police knew which car was which. The car must have seen the police and tried to leave, but not today. They stopped him on his way out turning. I was just parked in a spot crying hysterically. An officer comes over and asks if I know a Michael Stonebreaker. I say no, I don't. The officer continues to say he has a good amount of heroin on him and that this isn't his first arrest, so he'll be going away for a while. Why did he follow me? What was his motive? The officer also said the creeper said he was following me because he thought I was his friend. Well, why didn't he pull up to me at the red light we were stopped at? Why wouldn't he have tried to get my attention somehow? That was a very terrifying experience for me and taught me a valuable lesson. Pay attention to your surroundings day or night. Anything can happen, anywhere, even in a safe town. When I was a sophomore in high school, I lived about a 15-minute walk away from my school. It was on the same street and only past one intersection with residential houses on all sides. I have never walked home before in my entire life, as my parents always insisted on driving me since I live in a crime-ridden city. Mostly robbers, gangs, and poverty. My parents divorced around the time I hit 10th grade, and my dad moved out, leaving behind my sisters and mum at our house. My mum rented out the extra room and garage to my cousin and one of her friends and her boyfriend. I remember my mum had asked me to walk home since she was working a double shift at work that day. I didn't have any keys at the time, and she assured me that someone would be home, most likely my cousin, since he was between jobs and was shutting himself in the garage smoking pot all day for weeks now. I said yes and assured her I didn't mind. After school ended, I started my walk home. I was in a big crowd of kids walking home up until the intersection where we all deviated, as I was the only kid walking down my side of the street. As I kept walking, a dark-colored SUV parked about 20 feet from where I was. I didn't think anything of it. Eventually passed the car and kept walking. As I passed the car started slowly driving along the sidewalk, still close to the curb, staying within some yards behind me. I could hear their engines stay the same distance from me. I took out a small compact mirror from my shoulder bag, faking that I was checking my face, then saw the car still driving slowly, occasionally getting in the driving lane to pass up a parked vehicle, and then get close to the sidewalk again. The windows were a bit tinted and I couldn't see their face. I kept my same pace as to not raise any alarms, and as I was getting within view of my house, I saw there were no parked cars in the driveway. My heart instantly dropped because I knew this meant no one was home, and I didn't have any keys to my house since I never walked home. As I walked towards my house, the car parked right in front of my house and didn't move. I checked my backyard fence, and I was relieved to find it unlocked and went through. I booked it to an outside bathroom where I locked myself in. I called my boyfriend to come and get me, and didn't move from that spot until he arrived. All in all, it took my boyfriend about 15 minutes to get there, and he said there was nobody there when he arrived. I was afraid he was going to come back and break into the house or something, but fortunately for me, I never saw him nor his car again. This happened to me in 2007, when I was 12 years old, coming back from my elementary school. I took a bus ride which usually lasted around 40 minutes, and I decided to grab some pizza on my way home. There was this small shop right on the bus stop that I visited from time to time. To give you a bit of background, this was a two-way bus stop and pizza shop, and it was across the 4-lane road. So I had to leave the bus and walk in an underground passage to get the pizza and then come back. I walked through the underground passage, nothing creepy or unusual, just the basic communist look that I am used to, with the decent sprinkle of graffiti all over the place. I go to the pizza shop, order, and turn around to go to the underground again. At that very moment, one middle-aged looking guy approached me and started to talk to me in a weird way. He asked if I enjoyed this pizza, if I go here often and what's my name. After a few questions, I noticed he had this extremely huge scar from ear to neck, and part of his ear wasn't there, like literally missing the entire upper part. I started to get a really scared and weirded out feeling when we went to the underground passage, and that's the moment I told him I didn't want to speak with him anymore. He followed me for a few steps, grabbed me, and pushed me to the wall. Before I could say anything, he had his pocket knife right next to my stomach. I felt like the world has stopped. My mouth was dry, and my heart was beating at an extreme pace. And the only thing I could think of is how the hell am I going to get out of this situation without being hurt? I told him to leave me alone, and he started to ask for money. I didn't think for a moment and told him I have some crowns in my pocket. He took 150 crowns, and this was before we had the euro, so it's about €5, and he also took my silver chain. He then put his weapon back in his pocket and casually walked away like nothing had happened. I had mixed feelings about this. Obviously I was really scared, but more importantly, I was so pissed off at people who literally walked next to us while he was pushing me to the wall and holding his weapon in his hand. They did nothing. They didn't even look our way. I felt so betrayed and alone. It was obvious we weren't friends or anything, but even so. Since that moment, I promised to myself I would do whatever I could to help others if they were in situations like this. And if I couldn't, I would at least call the police and stay in relatively close distance to assist in any way I can. Don't be bystanders, people. This happened when I was a sophomore in high school. I used to take a private bus to school and back. However, when it came to dropping me off home, I was always the last one because I lived a little bit outside of my school district. My bus driver couldn't drop me off after dropping everyone in my school off because she had to pick up the elementary school kids. As a high schooler, we left school much earlier, so I either had to wait for her to drop every elementary school kid off, or I could just walk home from the elementary school. That school was fairly close to my house, perhaps a 10-minute walk. I would walk home every day from that stop. On one particular day, I got off the bus that would park behind the school's field in the back and started walking towards this adjacent parking lot. The school is located in front of a very busy street that was connected to the highway, and in front of the school there was a mall. I always wore headphones to avoid the noise of the busy street while I was walking home. When I got to the other parking lot, a small white car had pulled up and the guy inside started calling out to me. I usually ignore everyone that tries to talk to me when I'm walking home, but I accidentally made eye contact, so I decided to see what he wanted. I didn't notice it then, but looking back, the man was acting very strange. He was sort of jumpy and sweaty. His car was old and was a mess inside. In his passenger seat was a woman who looked angry or annoyed. I assumed they were just hot, as it was nearly 90 degrees outside. He was asking me if I knew where the mall was. Now, the mall is across the street, but there were a few shops independent of it that you had to go around, but it is still visible through the naked eye. I told him yes, to just go straight from behind the school, make a right, cross the busy street, and then make a right at the mall. He was acting like he didn't understand what I was saying and asked if I spoke Spanish. So I explained in Spanish, but again pretended he didn't understand and asked if I could get inside his car and take him to the mall, and then he would drop me off home. In my stupid mind at the time, all I thought was this guy is really annoying because you can literally see the mall from here. I was also thinking that maybe I should just take the ride home since I really didn't want to walk in the heat. However, something inside me was telling me not to get into this man's car. He kept trying to convince me, and the more he spoke, the more nervous he got. Behind me there was another car stationed next to a tree. Sometimes parents would wait for their kids a few minutes before school was over. There was a woman in the car with her window down, just glaring at the guy. The guy kept looking behind me at her. After rejecting him politely for the millionth time, he finally said okay, thank you, and sped off. I thought that was weird, but perhaps he wasn't from around here, which is why the streets were confusing for him. The lady behind me said, "Be careful who you speak to." I looked and awkwardly smiled and said, "Yeah, thanks." On my way home, all I felt was annoyance. The guy really annoyed me for interrupting me while I was walking home, and the lady for talking to me as if I didn't know about stranger danger. Years later, after listening to other people's Let's Not Meet stories, I realized that the man was trying to take me. He was trying to get me inside his car, and the lady behind me staring at him was making him very nervous. The passenger woman was probably there to get kids' confidence, but she was probably annoyed she had to be there in the first place. Perhaps she didn't want to do this. It honestly gives me chills to think They went to a school to try and pick up children. I wonder who else they tried speaking to. There are parents and security around, which is why I didn't see him as a threat at first. But if it weren't for my gut feeling, I could have easily gotten into his car and never been seen or heard from again. Also, that lady's presence really scared him off. So thank you, lady. And creepy sweaty guy trying to pick up kids. Let's not meet again. This story took place at the end of January 2020. For reference, I'm a 19-year-old female, and I'm about 5'5". This takes place in Canada, and where I live in Canada we tend to have a pretty cold winter that stays until the end of March. But this year it seemed as if Mother Nature had no interest in sticking around, which meant I could walk with my winter jacket open at night. Anyway, I'm a uni student, and my uni is all the way across the city from where I live. On the bus, it takes me about an hour and a half to get home, the latest being 2 hours away, and that only happens during snowstorms. This semester I was taking a night class that would usually end at 9 p.m. On this particular night though, we did an extra half hour because we had an in-class test at the end of the week. This extra half hour was optional, but since I needed help, I decided to stay. My staying resulted in me missing the safe bus, which was essentially the bus whose last stop was the local mall, which is where my mum would pick me up. If I wanted to take this safe bus, I would have to wait an hour for the next one, or wait 5 minutes and catch the bus that would take me straight to my house. I was exhausted, because I had been on campus since 8 a.m, and it was just an overall chilly day, so I decided to just catch the bus that was coming in 5 minutes. I should tell you that I don't live in the safest neighborhood. It's not the most dangerous one in my city, but I'd say it's in the top 5 of the most dangerous neighborhoods out here. So whatever, the bus ride is fine. I saw the local crackheads, which was nothing new to me, and after about an hour and a half I get off my bus stop, which is along this busy-ish road, and start walking home. About 2 streets from where I have to turn to get on my street, I see these drunk men standing outside of the bar that's located on the corner of my street. Now these men don't usually touch me or anything, but they're very vocal about things. They tend to catcall and just harass women. But I'm used to it, so whatever, screw them. However, I was not in the mood for their annoying things today. So that day I decided to turn on one street before mine and then cut through my back lane later. As I turn on the street, I see a man walking on the same sidewalk, going in the same direction. So I decided to go on the opposite sidewalk. He was quite tall and skinny, but about 30 to 40 feet ahead of me. And plus, he didn't see me, so I didn't think much of it. Now that night was very, very clear, and the stars were shining very brightly. So as I was walking, I decided to look up and admire them. I kept walking, and then I also stopped and took a picture, which turned out pretty nice, so I stood there looking at the stars for 20 seconds or so, and only then did I decide that it was time to carry on walking. I looked to see where the man was, and caught him turning left. I had to continue going straight, so I carried on going. Plus it was a very quiet night, so I figured I'd hear someone if they were behind me or anything. I live near a train track, and as I crossed the train tracks and took about 10 steps forwards, I heard a tapping noise behind me. I looked back and saw the same man from before speed walk about 35 feet behind me, tapping along the side of cars parked at the side. As soon as we made eye contact, he slowed down and looked up as if he were looking for something. I didn't want to assume anything yet, so I decided to start skipping, while also trying to be a bit faster. I looked behind me again, and the man was now 25 feet behind me. At this point I book it. I ran so fast because the back lane to my house was very close. As I was sprinting and went to turn the corner to get to my back lane, I looked to my side and saw the man running also. I legitimately felt my heart drop to my stomach, and I prayed I could quickly get to the front of my house. I ran, and thankfully got to the front, but didn't have my keys out. So I'm like out of breath, panicking while looking for my keys at an ungodly speed, and finally, after what felt like hours but was truly mere seconds, I retrieved my keys, opened my door and slammed the door shut and locked it. I caught my breath before going up the stairs because I didn't want to freak my parents out. It's safe to say I won't be taking any late classes for a while. I'm a female, and back when I was 18-19 years old, I was house-sitting with a girl I was studying with. The family we were house-sitting for went to the same church as her, but I didn't really know them that well myself. It was more to keep her company in a huge house. This was 1997, when the average teen like me did not own a cell phone. During the week that we were house-sitting, it was a short break in the school calendar, which is why this family was away and why the streets in the area were quieter than usual. My apartment, as well as the house we sat for, was not far from the university. My apartment was actually a 3-minute walk from it, and the house a further 5 minutes by car. So being a student neighborhood, it was particularly quiet this week. The first weird thing that happened the week I was at this house was that I dreamed I was driving through a dark forest on a windy, hilly dirt road with no lights anywhere except for those from my car's headlights. As I started to go down a hill, the headlights suddenly cut out and everything went dark. The car slowed down to a stop and died. I awoke. In the morning, I went out to my car and it wouldn't start. It had been working perfectly fine the day before, and I had to call a guy to come fix it. It was the starter motor. Well, that was the first creepy thing that happened that week. A day or two later, it was Friday. I planned on driving back home to my parents, who lived in a smaller town about 45 minutes away. I packed up my stuff at the big house and was going to head over to my apartment to collect whatever else I needed for the weekend. That trip between the house and the apartment was, as I mentioned, only 5 minutes or so away. Since it was winter, it was dark by the time I left at 7. As I was driving from the house, I noticed in my rearview mirror the headlights of the car behind me tailing very close. When I turned, it turned. Back then I was cautious, but not overly so. Cautious enough to notice, in such a short distance, that something strange was going on behind me. But then, when I pulled up to a traffic light, it wasn't there anymore, and I was struck with relief. However, it was short-lived. The car was now beside me. I looked to my right, and there was a man inside, alone, smiling at me, slightly maniacally. For a moment I thought, geez, I should drive with a beanie at night so people don't think I'm a petite 5'2" female with long blonde hair down to my waist, which is what I am. I also thought, well, he's in the lane to turn right, so I'm good. He pulled off and the headlights were behind me again, so close I could barely see them over the back of my car. What an arse, I thought. Who drives like that? Thank goodness my turn is coming up on the left soon. After another minute or two of this tailgating, I slowed down, strategically didn't indicate, and made a sudden sharp left into my driveway, opened the automatic gates and shot inside. The gates closed behind me, and the drama was over. I gathered a few things from the car to take up with me, and noticed on my way over to the stairwell that there was a man at the gate, just behind me. He was still on the other side, and I was at the far end of the parking lot, but I could make out it was the dude from the tailgating car. He was jumping up and down, shaking the gate with absolute rage. Well, I was safely on this side, so I wasn't completely gripped with fear, and besides, there was a group of students making a noise nearby, arriving for a party or something. I headed to the stairs and started going for the basement and ground level to the first floor. Rounding the stairs on the first floor when I noticed someone running across the parking lot towards the staircase. In hindsight, I still can't fathom why I didn't put two and two together. I guess it's because I subconsciously knew that there was the group being let in through the pedestrian gate. As I was rounding the staircase between the second and third floor, someone suddenly touched me. I spun around. It was the guy. He had slipped in as part of the small crowd. He said something. I said something sassy back and told him to F off. Then I turned my back on him to continue up the stairs. I lived on the third and final floor. He grabbed me from behind, held my back against his chest with his arm around my neck, and I felt something being held against my right side. Oh crap. It was a knife. He led me down, and I remember thinking that the light was broken on the bottom level, and that this couldn't end well. But I was calm. I resisted slightly, but he tightened his grip. I felt like I wasn't getting enough oxygen and started to become a dead weight. He started to drop me. I was at groin level. I elbowed and it connected. He dropped me but spun around to face me, ripped the front of my buttons down top, and then he stopped. He looked at someone behind me, someone taller than him, and his eyes went wide. He turned around and ran. I screamed. Then I too turned around to see who had come to help, but no one was there. People came out of their apartments after that. The police were called, and this was the second time they were called there that night. Turns out other weird things have happened that my dad had already called the police about, and they had come past an hour before. As it turned out, they caught the guy. I identified him in a lineup. He committed sexual assault serially, and was accused of doing it to 14 women. One had thrown herself out of the first floor of her apartment to get away from him and broken her leg. Weeks later, the police called me. Before his trial, his cell door had been left open. He was gone. Apparently, it was an inside job. Does anyone remember, back in 2016 there was a big thing about killer clowns? Well, I didn't believe any of it. I thought it was a big joke, until it happened to me. Here's my story. I was in 10th grade when the whole clown thing happened. I didn't really believe it. I thought it was just a big joke, just a bunch of losers that had nothing better to do than scare people on Halloween. But one night, I was walking home from my boyfriend's house. It was a far walk, but I liked getting out as much as I could and looking forward to my long walk home. When I finally got to the east end of town near the East Court Mall, halfway home, I saw a group of people standing in the parking lot in the dark. They started yelling at me. Now I was a 16-year-old female and was used to guys yelling at me or catcalling me. At first I thought it was a joke, just another group of guys yelling at me from across the street, because they have nothing better to do, and of course, male bravado. I just shook it off, when I noticed that two of them were walking towards me. I couldn't make out their faces at first, until they got a bit closer, and were now walking behind me. I keep hearing them yell at me, but the second time they did it, they started laughing like psychopaths, and laughing like clowns. I looked back to see that they were both wearing clown masks, and I could see behind them were at least 3 more clowns. I didn't want to panic or show them I was scared, so I walked a bit faster until I got to the end of my street. I didn't want them to see where I lived, so I made a wrong turn and walked up to a house and pretended to go inside. I hid behind a bush to see them walk right by me, until I heard one of them yell out a horrifying clown laugh, and a few others followed. Then another clown was yelling at me. "I'll find you, pretty lady. Come on, come out and play. We know where your street is, and we will find you." They finally left, and I went home. But a few hours later, I was getting a snack before bed. and I happened to look out my kitchen window to see the group of clowns walking past my house. This happened when my friend Emma and I were both 14, and we were out clothes shopping as teenage girls do during the summer. One thing I should mention is that our town is essentially arse end of nowhere, in Canada, and was just named one of the most impoverished towns in the province. A majority of its residents are under the poverty line. Our only strong production is farming. Our high school was one of the worst in the province. Most businesses are closed down or closing, so you can imagine what kind of people live here. When Emma and I were leaving the mall, we had to walk down this extremely long street to get back to the main street to our parents. It was a hike for our tiny legs, and especially worse in 35 degrees Celsius heat. So whenever we hung out, we always took breaks on this road. On this street was a strange assortment of connected houses, where 7 to 8 houses squished together almost like apartments. I always found them weird because they were the only houses on that plot of land. The nearest building were businesses quite a ways away. When we passed by and saw a group of stray kittens playing behind the houses, we beelined for them and all those precious kitten snuggles. Emma had bought a bag of Lay's chips, and I had gotten a BLT from Tim Hortons. So for lack of anything better, we fed the kittens chips, bread bits and bacon and pet them. Some guy noticed us and came out of the house on the far end where the kittens were. I can't remember his name, but it was something like Bernard, or something equally old school. He looked pretty unusual. A big guy with a big nose that looked like it had a cherry growing underneath it, wearing no shirt, which wasn't weird because it was hot as hell. He started talking to us, and we weren't weirded out at this point. He was polite, sitting on the picnic table and feeding the kittens real cat food, talking about how Mama Kitty probably hadn't made it, because the kittens had been on their own for a while, and how he fed them and they thanked him with snuggles just like us. He went back inside and we kept playing with the kitten fluffs. Emma and I ended up just chilling there with the kittens in our laps, chatting about teenage girl things, until about 20 minutes later when Bernard returned, with a friend, Steve, who was also shirtless. I remember getting a little uncomfortable with this guy because he also had no shirt, but started talking to me, suggesting I take off my jacket since it was so hot. Steve pointed to Emma saying she looked good. She was smart because she only had a skirt and tank top, her jacket tied around her waist. We just laughed it off and kept making polite conversation, but at this point we'd been there an hour and just wanted to meet our parents on the main street. At one point, I ended up turning around during a lull in the conversation only to find the back door open and a third guy standing in the doorway watching us. I remember this bit vividly because of how eerie it was. He was in full shadow, and I couldn't see anything about his face except his long hair and his skinny twig of a body, also shirtless. This guy was still as a statue, just watching us in the darkness of the house like a horror movie villain. Emma and I were like, nope, but we're just trying to get out of the conversation with Steve and Bernard. And then Bernard got weird. He asked us if we wanted to come in for a cold drink, which of course we refused. We were not going into that house. You should come inside. I have a friend in there who had an accident. His whole stomach had to be taken out. It's cool. You should come see him. I don't know how he thought that would get 2 girls to come inside, instead of just nope the hell out of there. And of course, we graciously declined his offer. You should come in. It'll make him feel better to see you. Bernard kept pushing. I think we saw him earlier standing in the doorway, I said. It wasn't meant to be accusatory, but he took it that way. Oh, I'm sure he was just listening to the conversation, he said playfully. Steve actually said, we're not creepy, promise. Yeah, you are, weirdo. We assured them we knew, but said we had to go and thank them for letting us pet their kittens. We were relieved when they said goodbye and went inside, shutting the door behind them. You would hope this is where things end. Of course, it was not. Emma and I started walking back down the road towards the main street with our things, talking about how weird that was. I remember I was texting my boyfriend at the time being like, "Hey, this weird thing happened. How messed up is that?" Then Emma hit my arm and I almost dropped my phone. But before I could tell her off, she looked at me and said deadpan serious, "They're following us." Like the genius I was, I turned around too to find them 10 feet from us, smiling and staring straight at us. They didn't call out to us, even when we saw them. They just kept following these teenage girls on a nowhere road. We immediately locked arms in case they attempted to grab one of us. I'm not entirely sure what our logic was if they attempted to take us. They'd get us both at once? Perhaps there's safety in numbers. All that I knew was that I didn't want to leave each other behind. And I frantically messaged my boyfriend asking what to do. He said to run and dial 911. So I called while we power walked the street, trying not to seem too obvious. When I gave the street, the operator told us there was actually a police station on that street. It used to be on the main street, but they apparently moved to a new building recently. And we were amazed by our luck. We stayed on the phone with her while we half walked, half ran down the street until we spotted it. We immediately turned in, but the front door was locked for some reason, so we panicked and bolted behind the station to hide behind some bushes. The operator was very nice and told us to stay down until a police officer came to get us, which they did a few minutes later. Despite how terrible most of the services are in our town, Emma and I have to give props to the police officers who were very professional and concerned about us. One officer mentioned he saw the two guys passing by and went to talk to them, presumably telling them it's stupid to stalk 14-year-old girls. We called our parents to come collect us at the station, a little freaked out but relieved to be safe. It was only later that we learned what the houses were for. They were halfway houses for people on probation. There were a lot of people who were violent, drug users, and perverse who lived in that complex. That's why it was separated from other residences and seemed so randomly placed. Every time I walked by that place, I crossed the street and warned my friends about it. Our mums told their connections of other mums' friends to do the same. So redneck jail creeps, let's never meet again. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed tonight's followed home stories. I really enjoyed them. I really liked this topic today. I mean, I often do, but I just thought the stories were quite strong. If you agree with me, you know what to do. I'd like to thank everyone who donates via Patreon or is a member for your continued support. It really does mean a lot. And if you'd like extra perks, you can click the link to find out more. But yeah, I hope all of you are well. My health's pretty much the same, but I'm getting used to the condition a little bit more. And I found that if I keep myself distracted doing things, I usually, it's usually manageable because I don't think about it that much. But it often flares up in the evening, which is a bit annoying. But other than that, it's all good here. Thank you everyone so much. It's October. I'm really excited. I've got something big planned for Halloween. Oh, I love October. I can't wait to make pumpkin pie. So I've actually written down all the topics that we're going to have in the next 15 days. The order is, not 100%, but I'll obviously put out polls and let you guys decide which ones you want first. But if a topic is in a poll, if it's not done on one day, it will be done within the next few days. So, you'll always get what I say is coming. But happy October, everyone. I hope all of you have a wonderful evening. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.